Welcome to Centrilogic's recording on the 1099 GL method webinar. So this is a separate recording on the 1099s for the 2021 year, specifically for the GL method. We have a separate recording that was done live for the AP method, and we encourage you to watch that recording as well, just because for the most part in this recording, I'll be going through the differences, specifically for the GL method. So just a reminder, this is meant to be done within 3 days. We've organized the content to help you get through the content in a better organized fashion, with day one being all about just getting the ESU put in and all the way to production. Day two is all about the data preparation. And day three is about running through the actual 1099 core process to get the output you want, which will be some PDFs, and depending on how you set up for filing with the IRS, the e-filing. And just a reminder, we do acknowledge that this process for clients, this 1099 process, is very difficult for many reasons. Number one being that it's not something we do every day. This is something we typically just do once a year. So we're very unfamiliar with the process or don't have much time to get accustomed to all the steps. Number two is we generally don't have much time to look at this process and spend a lot of time learning about it. It's usually done during year end, meaning that lots of other stuff is going on as well. And finally, the instructions are not clear. There's different methods, there's different ways to do things. There's things that change constantly. So it can be difficult to get a final understanding of how the process works along with all the changes required. So in terms of some extras you're going to get from here, we're going to be getting a checklist, as well as what your menu should look like if you're using the AP or GL method, as well as today's slides. That's no worries. So just a reminder, we are breaking this down into 3 different days, and really what we're trying to do is break all the steps into small, manageable, and easy pieces. So hopefully you'll see exactly what you need to do to perform your 1099s. So starting out on day one, I just want to let you know about some of the core changes for this one. ESU this year is not as difficult as it was last year, but there are some changes to know. There's a 1099G form, which you'll see in the right media. I will show that to you later. But please be aware that it's only available if you're using the AP method. You cannot use it for the GL method, although it is possible to use the GL method as a base, and then if you want to produce the G form, use the AP method with the GL method so that you can get the G form. A big one visually you'll notice is that we're accustomed to seeing 2 per page for the NEC form. It is now 3 per page. We also just do 1 per page if you really need to. Luckily, there will be the combined federal state filing option for the NEC. It wasn't available last year, but this is for the e-file specifically. And kind of like always, there are some miscellaneous box changes on these forms here, the NEC, MIS, and DIV forms. So you do want to take note of these Oracle support documents if you have an Oracle support account. A lot of the content that is in these webinars here is based on this link or this Oracle doc, as well as many other documents I have listed in the next slide. But this is the Oracle doc that I go to starting in November to see when the ESU is coming out. But one thing that you want to do is check the known issues tab all the way to the end of January. So if I bring up that document in Oracle support, it's got many tabs on there. So this here is where you'll see the ESU. So you can see it was released in mid-December. In fact, it was released exactly December 15th in the afternoon. So this is where you can hyperlink to the ESU to download it. Here you can see the special instructions for this ESU for this year. Here, what I was mentioning was the known issues. Is if some issues come up with this ESU, you'll be able to see that Oracle's listed any fixes or recommendations, and it's quite possible that you may have to download a new ESU to supersede the one you have. So check this page all the way to the end of January. Main issue I've seen so far was a table, which was this table here, had trouble generating. So if you were to go into data browser for that table, you just want to double check and make sure you don't get an error when you do a find in there. So I have no errors, but you may see an error come up if there was a problem with that ESU. But that's the only issue I've seen so far in this ESU. These are some other great documents you want to take a look at. So these are some frequently asked questions, the overall process. Again, a lot of the content in this webinar is based on these documents here. This one here is a great one for CNC if they have trouble installing the ESU. And JDE Edwards does release their guide in PDF form on the web about the 1099 process. And that is now up to date, and you can get that PDF guide from this link. So we as Centrilogic do recommend a specific timeline for doing your 1099s. So obviously we got to get the ESU to production. It's good to get that in usually the first week of January. Don't wait until the last minute just in case you run into problems. We do like to see you do your 1099 process in production kind of the second last week of the month. So at least by getting it done that time, so you're not waiting to the last day, just like I mentioned before. But don't actually submit the 1099s till the last week of the month. The reason being is that another bug could be identified, and this will give you a chance to redo your 1099s if a bug has been discovered. So again, don't wait till the last second to submit to the IRS or mail to your vendors, but somewhere on this week, maybe January 25th, get your ESU or your 1099 submitted that day. So for the 1099 method, there were some updates for AIs for some of the new boxes on the form. So you want to make sure you go to the special instructions for the ESU. I have these AIs in the next slide here. These are the ones you should add. I don't think these will impact many people. These are some kind of the ad hoc ones, but still it's good to add them as best practice. And just keep in mind the AIs are cumulative, meaning that if you miss special instructions from prior years, you want to make sure you add those instructions from prior years as well. So as part of the ESU validation, you should validate the BI publisher templates. So make sure they exist, making sure the effective dates in the BI templates are correct, and make sure you get rid of any old templates in one of the BI templates applications. I'm not going to go through that on this webinar recording, but please feel free to go back to my AP method recording and watch all the stuff I do with the BI publisher. If you are going to use the 1099G form, there's a new object you need to add to your security roles. So don't forget that. It should be the special instruction on the ESU, but Oracle typically forgets to mention security. So just make sure you add this object to your 1099 roles. You want to verify the versions and processing options for all the things that you need to use. And I'll talk about that here in the next slide afterwards. And finally, when you're doing the ESU validation, you want to do some basic testing just to make sure like the core forms like NEC or miscellaneous come out with the right outputs, make sure everything appears in the right boxes, and actually try the e-file for them both to make sure that you're actually going to get an e-file out of it. So in terms of versions, Oracle does mention that you should always delete and recreate custom versions if you had them, mainly because there could be corruptions in the specifications, but that could apply to anything in JDE Edwards or any ESU. However, I typically don't create custom versions unless I'm trying to do something special with data selection. So that'd be my recommendation as well. If you don't need specific versions, just use the base JDE or XJDE versions, so you don't have to worry about deleting or recreating new versions as part of this process. In terms of the processing options, Oracle does update the processing options on the right media. I think that's a very critical one to look at. So you do want to verify that the limits on that application is appropriate based on what you feel is right for your each box, as well as you want to check the processing option on the e-filing app, the one that exports the file, just to make sure you know where the e-file is going to the enterprise server. So just a heads up, if you are going to modify the forms in any way, you do want to take backups of the BI templates that you're going to modify, or actually, creating new ones and uploading them. I do get a lot of requests to change the forms, mainly to like fit the mailing address in that specific mailing envelope, but you have to be very, very careful on how you do this. And I go through this in the previous recording for the AP method. You have to exercise caution on that. So be sure to watch that part on that webinar recording if you do want to modify your templates. And some of our clients, they do request that for the 1 per page type for the 1099 prints, to get the instructions on 1 page as well. Because by default, what JD Edwards will do is print the 1099 on 1 page and then print the instructions on the back. But sometimes it's nice to have the instructions all on 1 page and then just fold that 1 page into the envelope. So if you do need help on that, please reach out to us. So this tip here is more important for after you do the 1099s, but if you didn't do this last year, you should always take backups of the core tables just through data browser on the database. I've listed the tables here for you. And it's always great to have backups of this just in case you need to do a correction or do some sort of reference to see what was going on for that 1099 year. So along with these specific tables, you do want to take a copy of your e-file, which is quite understandable. This here is for your UDCs for mostly the AP method, but the 04ST is important for state filing. So if you do have to change those UDCs, it's good to have backups for that. And specifically for the GL method, it's good to take a backup of your AAI table, just in case you are changing the AIs dramatically. So that is all day 1. As I mentioned before, we do have a checklist that you should be able to go through. And I do list out some references on where to get information. So for example, if you want to know the states that are applicable for the UDCs, the combined method, I put the website over here. Put all the security menu stuff, the testing, all that stuff that are very good to know when validating ESU. So moving on to day number 2, this is a critical one where a lot of people make mistakes. So a big part of the data preparation is looking at the company setup and the supplier setup. So before I go into those things, I do want to just touch base on the 1099 methods, as I've been talking about the AP method and the GL method. So the AP method is the most popular one. It is based on category code 7 in the address book that goes onto vouchers from the supplier. The GL method is it's based on the general ledger table and the expenses that you code to on your PO receipts or your vouchers. So that's the one we're going through here today. There's also one called the combined method, which is really, it is what it is. You use your GL method as the primary and then do some exception-based stuff as using the AP method. So the AP method, as I mentioned before, we already did an entirely separate webinar recording on this, so please watch that recording, but it is really based on category code 7 in the address book for the vendor. The GL method is heavily based on the general ledger, what was coded to specific accounts, and those accounts must be referenced in the AI ranges. So those are the PX AIs that we have. So if I go in the system here, and I go to my automatic accounting instructions app, you'll see all these PXAIs. So PX is for the 1099s, and then usually the next two letters references the box. So A1 references the rent box and the miscellaneous. And then the next 1 and 2 is just part of our normal AI ranges. So, I'm looking at 4410 for the missed rent as one of my ranges for that one. And then the combined method here, like I said before, is you run the geo method as your base, but then for some exceptions or adjustments or certain suppliers, or even maybe trying to use the G form, you could use the AP method in combination with the GL method to produce some 1099 outputs. Now, in terms of verifying your company setup, I'm going to go in the system here and just show you how to do that. I'm going to go to my address book. I've set up company 90 in the address book. You want to make sure that you add your tax ID for your companies. You cannot produce your 1099s without a tax ID for your own companies. Please be aware that you need a mailing address, which will print out on the 1099s. And this is an important concept, is if you have multiple lines for address lines 1 to 4, if I were to put something in here, such as suite number 202, the 1099 process will only take the last populated line in the mailing address. So it'll ignore this first line here, but take this one here. So it's very important that you put everything on one line. It could be like this, or just put it on the first line. Just make sure everything is on one line in there and make sure it's the last line used is what you want to see. Okay, another thing you want to do for your company is if you go to the who's who, you want to add a contact name. So add a mailing name with the type of contact name. That will go into the e-file. And you also want to add a phone number to that record, which will also be required for the e-file. And might as well, you might add an email address, which will also go into the e-file. There's my email address. So that is the company setup. I listed everything here. One thing I didn't mention was the related address. So if you have companies or legal entities that are actually just really one from the IRS point of view, you do need to combine them. So if I go back into my address book record, if I go to the related address, you could choose any one of these codes here from parent number to, I think, factor special payee. Say, you know what, this is really part of company 80. You can put 80 in there and that will combine everything together. However, you must make sure that the Purse Corp code and the tax ID are exactly the same between the companies. The Purse Corp code is right here and the tax ID is right here. They must be exactly the same in order to combine for the company side. On the supplier side, there's very similar things to know. I want to look up the supplier I used in my test here. So I created this one here. Every vendor that's applicable for 1099 must have a tax ID. So you have to worry too much about the dashes. Dashes will come into the tax ID in your 1099s based on the Purse Corp code that you select. You want to make sure you have the right mailing name, which I will show you another thing to know about the mailing name here shortly. Please be aware that that address line 1 to 4 trick I just mentioned about the companies does apply here. So make sure everything is on one line. And it's the greatest line that you have on here that has all the information. Most importantly, you need to populate the Purse Corp code for the vendors that need a 1099. And only N's or P's are required for that. Anything that's not an NRP will not go through the 1099 process. If you happen to have a foreign vendor that has a country that's not US, you do need to put the F in here for foreign. So similar to the companies, if you have multiple vendors set up in your address book and they're actually the same entity from an IRS point of view, you do need to combine them. So you'll use this related address tab here. And I typically pick second address number. I don't like using the parent number or factory special payee. So you got to pick one of these values here to combine. And it's like a parent-child relationship. So if I had 605751 as my parent, I would do that. And again, make sure that the Purse Corp code and the tax ID exactly the same for those vendors. Otherwise, the combination won't work. I mentioned the mailing name is if you have a mailing name that's different than the actual mailing name you have here for the IRS, you could go to the who's who and add a second line. So this is the second line I've added. I put a different mailing name and I put the 1099 legal name type code on there. And both this and this will print out on the 1099 exports. So for these next slides here, I did just highlight all the things I just discussed, making sure the tax ID is there, making sure you have the mailing address set up. Here's just a reminder about that address line 1 to 4. It doesn't take all 4 lines. It takes the max one that was populated. So just make sure you have everything on that one line. Again, the Purse Corp code, the only ones that are 1099 applicable are P or Ns. And you may need to put F in the payables yes, no code if it is a foreign vendor. These are just some reminders, again, as I just mentioned, but if you have trouble understanding the NRPs, you can look at the before that the vendor provided and see where the dash is. Typically the non-corporate entity will have a dash in the third character, whereas the individual will have 2 dashes in this format. Just a reminder, this is the related person, related address tab, where if you need to combine vendors, you do need to set those parent-child relationships up using one of these codes. And if you happen to use this for both the companies and suppliers, make sure you choose the same code for both, because it is used later on when you build a work file, and it has to be the same value. Here's just a reminder about the mailing name, where if you need multiple names to print on there, put the legal name as the second line and use the type code legal name. So some suppliers do get tagged with a foreign tax for the Foreign Tax Compliance Act. So you would go into this application here, this P0451401, to tag suppliers by their tax ID. It's not by supplier number, it's by their tax ID. So you would go in there and you would check that box. And really what that box does will check this thing here on your miscellaneous printout. It'll actually have that FATCA filing requirement checked. That's where that box comes into play. Again, it's just a separate app where you inquire for the tax ID and check that box. There's also these CUS IP numbers. And this is something I used on, I think, the INT form there. And it is for this tax return type 67. So you have to enter specific numbers. So if you do have any of these CUS IP numbers, there is a special application where you're going to enter those values. So between the AP method and the GL method, the differences are very small at this point, but the process on day number 3 is much different, or there's different programs to use. They're very similar in concept, but they have a lot different programs here. So we're going to go through these steps here now to show you the GL method. I'm going to close out of here. And I'm going to my 1099 GL page. So I've done my best to put the steps in the right order. Okay, so we have automatic accounting instructions. That's from day 1. The address book comes into play for day 2. But this core process here is your day 3. So if you follow these steps here one by one, I'm going to go through these here very simple with you. So the first step is to clear the GL work file. Now, if you ever used the AP method in the past, you may have to clear the AP work file as well. But for sure, if you're using the GL method, you will have to clear the GL work file. So I'm just going to click on that. And you just run this. There's no data selection, there's no processing options. You just run it. And don't even worry about looking at the output for it. This next step here, update pay information for receipts. This is only required if you use the procurement system in JD Edwards and you use the 3-way match. If you happen to use procurement and only do the 2-way match, you can skip that part as well. But for this report here, if you are using the 3-way match for procurement, you only run this once. So you're going to put the reporting year in, it'll be 2021, and you'll run this. And what this is doing is it's tagging transactions in the general ledger with the payment date and the payment number. You can only run that once. The reason being is because it creates these TX ledger records, and to run it multiple times, you're gonna get the same information multiple times. If you absolutely had to do that again, you might have to use special data selection or delete those TX ledger entries and try again. The next step is very similar. It's the update payment information. What that's going to do is put the payment number and the payment date on the general ledger transactions based on those PXAIs. So this is very similar. Again, you don't have to worry about the data selection, just run wide open. And you just got to change the reporting year on this. This one you could run multiple times over and over again if you really had to, if you're making further adjustments later on. So we've done these 3 steps here. These are part of the core process. There is a report here you can run called the payment exception report. And what that will do, let me just get this here. What that will do is it'll identify any issues you may have, like an invalid supplier number or GLs with no option counts, which I think should be very, very rare or unheard of, or some payments that do need some issues resolved with partial payments or discounts. So again, all you have to do is really just change your reporting year and look at the output for it and take care of any adjustments that you want to do. So there's an adjustments that you can run. So I've created one vendor here for my 2021 here. And what you would do in here is select into the documents and make some adjustments on the amount. So for example, if you wanted to take this down by $300, what you would do is put the reversal in, or just put like -300 if you wanted to, with the totals. I typically don't like using this application because it's at the GL level. Again, performance using it can be very, very difficult. So that's why I typically do is I would use AP adjustments, so the GL AP combination method, to do any minor revisions that I want to do. But you're still free to use this app, but just be aware this is at the GL level, and performance using this app can be very, very difficult. You can't really search for the supplier number in here. You can only do it based on these documents. So we've updated the GL. We've looked at some exceptions. We could possibly do some payment adjustments here or do the AP work file adjustments if you want to. But the next step is to build the GL work file. Again, you can just run this wide open and put the correct reporting year in here. But be aware, this is where that related address number combination comes into play. You want to make sure this is set appropriately if you do have to combine companies and or vendors. I'm going to run that build work file. And just be aware, if you did any adjustments, you have to do that before you build the work file. You can't build the work file, do an adjustment on this program and expect everything to go. You have to do this one first before this one. However, if you're just doing the AP adjustments, you can do that any time before you do your printing. So I'm done building my work file. The next thing I do is run my preview. And I would run this one here, the GL AP method all types. And just be aware that this one does have processing options. There's a processing option for checking duplicates versus combining. You may want to take a look at that. And there's also limits here, which is the same limits you'll see on the right media application for what you want to suppress if they don't meet these thresholds. So you might want to go through these limits here again to make sure they're correct based on what you want them to be. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm just going to run this report here. So here's a copy of the report. I just have a sample there. What you're really looking for is any errors in this last column, this description column. So that could be like missing tax ID, duplicate tax ID. Those are the core problems you want to look at. And that will help you identify anything you need to correct before you can start printing your 1099s. See if I can take a look at that report. There it is. That's the same output you saw on my PowerPoint slide. Let's go back to our core process. So there is a register report. It's more of an optional thing, but it's just simply going to list out the documents in the GL that are 1099 applicable that have the payment number and payment date on there. But I'll run it anyways. Again, you have to make sure the reporting year needs to be set properly. And we'll let that run. So there I've got two different documents on there. So Rand is just looking at the GL. So once our work file, both the GL and potentially the AP work file is all good to go, I'm ready to do my write media. So the first thing I do is do the PDFs, and I like to do the blank forms. So I'm going to do the miscellaneous type. Most of the time, clients use the MIS and the NEC, but there's that new 1099G form if you're going to be using it. So that's all I need to do here is to submit this one. And I'll click OK. And I'm going to get my output for the miscellaneous. So there's my output that I wanted. There's my miscellaneous form. I got the instructions being printed, one per page. So you do that for the NEC as well. If you do need to use the pre-printed formats, you would just choose the pre-printed forms. Be aware there's also this paper facsimiles as well as a proof report. That's just another way of getting some official documentation for your 1099s out of JD Edwards. You don't need to submit those at all. Those are only for just documentation proofs only. Once you're ready to do the e-file, you're going to choose electronic media. And if you have MIS and NEC, you'll have to do it twice, one for each. You have to put your transmitter company in, which has all the information about the company as you as a transmitter. So if you remember, I put in my contact name, my phone number, and email. You'll want to have that in there on that company. And you also need your TCC code. This is something you have to get from the IRS. If you don't know what your number is, you have to call the IRS and potentially submit a form online to get that number. But this uniquely identifies you as a transmitter. It does not identify you as a company. It's you as a transmitter. So you need these two in here in order to get the e-file out properly. Now I put my email address on my company, but I could just put in here anyways. This will flow out to the e-file. And if you do need to state filing, it's good to do the combined federal state checkbox when you're doing the checkbox or this write media, and click OK. So what this is doing here is it's populating a temporary table in the background for the e-file. And it's going to run here. It's done. You would go to the export application. And this is what your e-file will actually look like. You pretty much export this and use it as your e-file, but really what you should do is go to Form Export. And it will place the IRS tax.txt file on the enterprise server or the location you put in the processing options for this app. And that's where you grab the e-file and upload to the IRS. So I put all these steps in this checklist here. So we talked about the TCC number, getting that. In order to submit the e-file to the IRS, you would have to go to this fire.irs site, but be aware there is a test site that you can use to try out your file before you actually submit to the IRS. And once you do submit your e-file, you do want to go into your site and check to see if it's been accepted by IRS every day or so until it's been accepted. It usually takes a few days. So here I just, here's a reminder of what I've done here in terms of getting my blank sheet forms. Those are the ones that go to the vendor, the blank sheet forms. If I'm doing e-filing, these are all the things you need to put in for your e-filing. So that is it for this GL method. I just want to highlight again the differences between AP method and GL method. The GL method uses the PX AIs. So for this here, just be aware there were some new AIs to add, but I don't think they're going to be applicable to you. And be aware of the process that you need to run. And I'm going to have an export of this E1 page for you to know that all the steps you need to run from start to finish. I did have some optional stuff on my page here. These two reports here are generally used to identify issues with the vendor at the address book level for their tax IDs and their PERS Corp code. You're free to use those if you wish. Then these ones here are the ones I mentioned earlier with that FATCA and the CUS IP numbers. And then this one here is for the AP work file adjustments. Also, as part of this webinar, I do give you the export of my menus that I have that kind of puts all the steps in the right order, similar to this page. So my name is Grant McIver. If you have any questions about the 1099 process, please feel free to reach us here on this page, and we will be glad to help you out.